Welcome, teacher friend. I'm Lori.
And I'm Melissa.
We are two literacy educators in Baltimore. We want the best for all kids, and we know you do too.
Our district recently adopted a new literacy curriculum, which meant a lot of change for everyone. Lori and I can't wait to keep learning about literacy with you today.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to take a minute and provide some context into what are GEODES before you listen to this amazing podcast with Lorraine Griffith and Emily Gula, two integral ladies in getting GEODES up and running and off the ground for great minds. So GEODES are accessible, knowledge-building books designed to engage emerging and developing readers. They were created in a response to the need for authentic books so that young readers can practice their decoding skills while learning rich content about important ideas in science, history, and the arts. You're going to love hearing their specific examples as they dive into each text and tell us a little bit about how the books address science, history, and the arts. GEODES are the bridge between Wit and Wisdom, our core instruction, and a systematic foundational skills reading program. So it really helps students to practice those decoding skills that they're learning in their systematic phonics program. But it also builds the content-rich knowledge that we know they need in order to access texts in Wit and Wisdom core instruction. I wanted to tell a story about how engaging these texts are for my own little one, who is 7 years old. She just finished first grade, and I had a few of the books laying around and introduced them to her. She was so excited to read them that she wanted to read them all on her own. She read every single one, and then she wanted to go to the library to get them because she was so enthralled with them. So as she was reading them, she was laughing out loud. She was admiring the artwork, admiring the pictures, really pointing to the photographs. And she was even able in some of the text to read the more section, which you'll hear about in our podcast today, which is on a 5th and 6th grade level, reading level. And she was so pumped because she had all of this knowledge about the topic to read the more section, or to at least try it, and to explain to me what it was saying in that section, especially the one on Thorny Devil. That was her absolute favorite. So I think you're going to really enjoy this podcast today. Melissa and I had a wonderful time recording it with these ladies. So thank you so much for listening. And we hope that this provides a bit of context into GEODES so that you know exactly what you are listening to and what the gals are going to explain today. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast today. Melissa and I are so excited, really excited, like more so than usual, to have Lorraine Griffith and Emily Gula from Great Minds with us because they are going to share so much information about GEODES. Your mind is going to be blown. We're going to be exploring GEODES, the what, the why, the how, and they're going to tell us about all the things relating to GEODES. So I'd love for them to introduce themselves so that you can get to know them. And then we'll dive into GEODES and how it came to be. So Lorraine, would you share a little bit of background information about yourself?
Sure. I'm so happy to be here. I'm a retired teacher. I spent some years in the music classroom. That's a little known fact about me. I taught music first, and I wasn't very good at that. And then I found my calling when I went to an elementary school as a substitute to make a little money on the side and fell in love with elementary education. And I did that for 27 years
Aww.
and ended up retiring 3 years ago to come on full time with Great Minds. I've always been passionate about knowledge in the classroom. That has been since 1993. That has been my passion about what I could do in the classroom to help students to have deep knowledge about the world.
I love that.
You're ahead of your time.
You were. Lorraine, would you mind sharing what grades you taught?
Sure. I taught 5 years in kindergarten. That was when I first started getting into the knowledge thing. Then I taught about 9 years in fourth grade, a whole lot of years in fifth grade. I lost count of that one. Then I ended up teaching all the students in K4. When the Common Core Standards first came out, I did something called a literacy lab for 2 years, where the kids came to me with their teacher as a pullout once a week. And I think I had 630 kids a week that I taught English language arts. And then I went to a remedial reading room and sat at a kidney table for 3 years with a Title I position. And that's how I ended when I retired.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Well, that's quite a variety. So I'm sure all the teachers listening can relate to that, like something changing here and there in their career.
Exactly.
Awesome. Emily, tell us about you.
Yeah, well, I don't have 600 kids a week. I don't think I can beat Lorraine on that. Lorraine, that's very impressive. I started teaching in New Orleans public schools, and I started in fourth grade and then moved down to first grade and kindergarten. Spent the most time in kindergarten. And then I did literacy coaching and reading intervention in New Orleans. So I was about there for 10 years in the public schools there. And then I moved on to Great Minds, and I was the first grade content lead for the Wit and Wisdom curriculum. And now I'm the GEODES teacher resource editor for the GEODES project.
Awesome. And fun fact, Emily and I actually started our teaching careers together in New Orleans in 2003.
Familiar face.
Oh my gosh. It's a small world.
Small world.
That is so great. I'm so glad you know each other.
Wit and Wisdom brought us back together.
Exactly.
Right? I feel like Wit and Wisdom brings everyone together. We're all always learning together.
Absolutely.
I love that. Great. So now that we know about each of you, would you mind just diving into GEODES and telling us just how they came to be? Like, what is the research? Tell us all the things about what got us to this point of launching GEODES, how they were developed, illustrators, authors, who wrote them. We just can't wait to hear everything that you have to share about all the background on this incredible text selection.
Okay, well, I'll start with, I'm going to just take you back to my kidney table.
Take us to your kidney table. I'm sure we can relate.
Yes. And sitting there with 4 or 5 students, all struggling with reading, and digging in for the book that I'm supposed to use. The book is very loosely connected to a phonics idea, sometimes not even being able to find that phonics piece in the book. So there was that issue.
Yep.
But then every single time I introduced a new book to the students, it was a different topic.
Yep.
So it never felt like the students were anxious to read the next book. It was just like, oh, what's this one about? Oh, it's about that dog. Like it would just be, they weren't things that would get students excited about knowledge.
Yeah.
And then so I had that frustration because I had this passion for knowledge ever since I had read Cultural Literacy, Hirsch's book from the late 80s. I just felt like what students in my rural community really needed was to have strong background knowledge when they came to a text. But it just felt like that was irrelevant at the kidney table.
Yeah.
But I had spent all those years in a regular classroom feeling like, as much, we worked really hard to build content knowledge. So students had more equity with their background knowledge. And of all the places that we needed students to have it, it was at that in small group instruction.
Yeah.
So that for me was what my personal passion was with this. And when we started this project, we had just finished Wit and Wisdom. And so we kind of we sent the very last things off in December of 2016, sent, our teacher editions to the printer, the student editions to the printer. And in January, we met in New Orleans for a retreat and invited a teacher who is very passionate about foundational skills instruction and teaching Fundations, which is Wilson's Tier 1 product for foundational skills. And we asked her to come and just bring samples of all the books she uses with her students.
Mm-hmm.
And she laid them all around the table from all different publishers. She had been teaching for a long time. And we read lots of the books. We talked about a lot of the books. And I will never forget, like, sitting there and kind of looking at each other and saying, okay, so what it looks like from these books is that decodability is so limiting.
Yep.
That all publishers have ever done in the past is to do these. They try to make sense, and some publishers have gotten better with
Right.
it. But it just felt like it was like this random pile of text that were teaching what students needed to have. They desperately needed to practice those phonics because Marilyn Adams says,
Yep.
you know, they only learn that phonics is worth learning if they actually use it in text.
Yep.
And we knew they weren't doing that in level text. So for them to be using it we wanted them to be able to use it in decodable text, but were our only options those kinds of books.
Yeah.
So we turned to each other and just basically said, you know, if we can't disrupt the market with what we're creating, let's just not do this. Like, either we disrupt in a really positive way,
Yeah.
or we don't even do it. Is it possible that students could actually learn to read while at the same time they're reading to learn? Like, can we do that together? And that was really the question that we walked away from NOLA with that challenge of saying, you know, if we're going to do this, we have to do it differently.
Yeah.
That makes so much sense, Lorraine. I'm a middle school teacher by trade, so this, you know, that world is a little foreign to me, but I remember helping to type up some of the decodable texts that we had here in Baltimore City. And I remember turning to our elementary specialist and just saying, what are these stories? like these don't even make sense. Like, what are our students reading?
Yeah.
So
I think you told me that too, Melissa. You were like, I have to tell you, I was typing up these books, and
that was my light bulb moment.
Book. Yeah.
These don't even make sense. They're just, you know, rhyming words and have the same sounds. But yeah, I had that same realization.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the student roll down the hill, roll, roll, roll. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm just really glad that you guys not only recognized it, but then like said, we have to do something about it.
Yeah.
We definitely, this is Emily, we definitely thought about that a lot and thought our beginning readers deserve more. And why, why shouldn't they have those books that make sense? I mean, that shouldn't be the lowest bar. I mean, we have a higher bar than that just basically we want the illustrations. We want them to love reading these books. And we also thought, I guess, more globally, thinking about NAEP scores and other things throughout the country, that, you know, our scores haven't been growing. We haven't seen the growth, and this is not to be a blame game, because that's not going to get us anywhere. You know, what can we do to try to, something's not working here, you know, so why can't we? Let's try to change it, and this is one way that we might be able to do that. So that was behind our thinking too.
That's amazing. So can you tell us about who wrote these books? Authors, illustrators? Did you pull from all over the country? What happened? How did you decide your next step? So like, you decided that you want to disrupt the market, which kudos to you. I think that that's incredible that you're wanting to just disrupt in a positive way, right? And do what's right by kids and support teachers in accessing this content knowledge, as well as the word study skills, the systematic phonics that they need in a way that's really meaningful. So what happened after that? You decided, and then
Okay. Really interesting. If you know Great Minds at all, you know that there is no hill we're not willing to climb. And so we were given a certain time period that we were supposed to complete these books in. So our goal was to create 176 books in 39 months.
Wow.
And I will never forget, like, we had a retreat in August, and we were going back to start September 1st. And I went home and told my husband, who has known publishing for quite a few years. I went home and told my husband, I said, so we're going to do the 64 first grade books within 1 year. They're going to be at the printers. And he just looked at me and said, that's impossible. Of course, in his most supportive voice. And we did it in 364 days.
Wow.
So we got them to the publisher, which was absolutely amazing. But this is how we did it, it's just crazy because every single book has 67 milestones. So when you talk about like, you have to come up with the concept of the book. You have to think about like, where is this book in the scope and sequence of what the child actually knows phonetically? What trick words does the child know? And we collaborated very closely with Wilson with the scope and sequence that matched Fundations. So we had that part, but then we had rough draft and then first round and then second round and then third round. And then we had, so there was a lot of process, and that was before it went to design. And then with design, you have to look at sketches. We have an ace accuracy expert, Trish Schuster, who is very, very careful to make sure that everything that gets out there is something that does not have to be later untaught when the students get older. So we have lots of examples of that work with accuracy. But we ended up putting a call for authors, and every author did a blind audition, whether they worked at Great Minds, whether they had published books with Scholastic in the past, whether they had done had a long history of writing these kinds of books or had never written a book in their life. They all handed in blind auditions. We ended up with a total of 36 authors by the time we were finished. We have 11 editors that would work with each one of those authors. We ended up with 8 designers, 4 photographers, and 28 illustrators from all over the world. We actually had some from Colombia, Italy, Argentina, Spain, all over the U.S. Yeah. So it ended up being a mammoth coordination of people, but the product, we're just so thrilled because at first, our advice to us, they were things like, well, just do a template,
Right.
and just plug in graphic art. And our creative designer, Whitney Lyle, would have nothing to do with that, and really wanted every book to be more like a trade book, that a child would look at it and say, oh, I love the way this illustrator illustrates because I remember, and start recognizing that because the illustrator is good enough in their own right to have fans. So we're hoping that some of these illustrators really rise to the top with their other texts, because some of them are pretty well-established illustrators. We have an author, Joe Bruchak, who is quite well known for his work with Native American tales and lots of other writing too, but he ended up writing a book for us in 2nd grade. People just jumped at the opportunity to write on these wonderful topics.
It's exciting. And I was going to say too, they're gorgeous. First of all,
my God.
I mean, just looking at them, you want to pick them up and look at them. But it is really neat that, and something I didn't think about before, but now that you're saying it, I noticed is they're all different, and they don't feel like just repetitive and the same. They look different. The stories sound different. So having that variety in authors and illustrators really shows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one of the things that the president of our organization, Lynn Munson, is very committed to having art integrated through all of our books. So when the students finish the K2 set of texts, they will have learned about Dürer, Mondrian, Van Gogh, Mallet, Seurat, Bierstadt, and lots more artists. So there's also that whole element that runs through it that you see in once at least in every 16 books. We have a featured piece of art and the artist that created that work. So there's also that facet that goes with it, aside from all the other knowledge building. That's a knowledge strand that runs through all of our work. And you'll notice that correlates to Wit and Wisdom.
Yes, that's incredible. I'm sitting here and I'm holding in front of me, not to interject, but I'm sitting here and holding in front of me. I have Cinderella by Rachel Hilton and Christopher Sear. I think I'm saying his name correctly, his last name.
Yes. Yes.
And I'm holding Thorny Devil by Maria Myers. And I just want to point out to those who are listening who can't see these texts, Cinderella is just, I read it this morning, or well, I'm sorry, I didn't read it. My 7-year-old read it this morning. And it just, the wonder on her face looking at the pictures, she actually stopped halfway through the book and she said, "This is so pretty to look at, Mom. Like, it's just beautiful." And I was like, "It is, isn't it? It's so pretty." And then she was reading Thorny Devil and just hysterical laughing, because this one, Thorny Devil is telling about this type of lizard, and it in the desert, and just the photographs are insane. Like, they are just up close in this face of this animal that's crazy looking and just hysterical. And they're just so engaging. And I think that's the point that I want to make right here, is that what you did to build this product is not just a product. This is really that market disruptor that you mentioned earlier, because of how all of the elements came together. So I guess my question is, like, what, in your opinion, like, what makes Geodes different? And is there anything else on the market right now? And
I would say,
Lorraine or Emily, it's up for grabs. So whoever feels like answering one of the, you can split the difference if you'd like to take one and one.
Go ahead, Emily.
I guess there is, not that we know of right now. I mean, I think a big difference that we thought of when making these, that there tended to be, before I understand that in grades K1 and 2, you were learning to read, and the texts were reflective of kind of being basic in that way. And then maybe they got more interesting in 3rd grade and on, because then you were reading to learn, and we want to combine those sooner. There's a lot of research out there by Paris about different skills and people, the importance of skills and knowledge. And we thought, let's bring those together. So I think rather than wait till students get to 3rd grade, then you can teach them about the printing press. No, let's do that now in 1st grade. Why not? I think a lot of that was the why not versus that hasn't been done. Why not? Let's try it. We think kids can do it. We know kids love knowledge. We know teachers love teaching that and seeing kids excited. So I think that was a big difference in what, make our books different thus far. And I think we've seen it. Like, you guys on your podcast interviewed Mandy and Amy from Mad River, and Lorraine and I and another colleague, Michelle, were fortunate to be able to visit classrooms there, and it was just wonderful for us to see books in kids' hands. And I know we were in classrooms where there are other books available, and teachers said, the kids, I have other books in my library, but the Geodes are the ones they read all the time. And we'd walk in, during the center time or whatever it happened to be, they were reading the Geodes. They read them with the teacher, went back to their seat, and were reading them again. And so I think what makes them different too is that it's not just I'm at the kidney table reading them and then I go back to my seat and I'm doing something else. Like, they want to continue reading them, and they're just so excited about them.
So at that same visit where Emily and I were there was a scene where they, in Wit and Wisdom, in the very first module, they learn about the joy of books, the world of books. In the second module, they learn creature features, which are animals. And in the third module, they learn about the wind. Now, you might think to yourself, how do you do 6 for 5 and 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds on the wind? And it's interesting because we did 4 on the force of the wind. Then we did 4 on the energy that wind creates. And then we did 4 on windmills and closed it with wind-oriented storms. So come with me to this scene around a kidney table. And there was a boy. There were a lot of children in this group. And there was a boy that was in and out of the conversation. We all know those kids. And he was under the table during parts of the conversation that the teacher was having with this new book called The Dust Bowl. And so it's the next to the last book of the set of 16. And he had already obviously accrued quite a bit of knowledge. So she's introducing this book and she's saying, like, this was a period of history where the dust was like swirling around because of the wind. And he pops up from under the table and he says, "The wind is a powerful force." then he goes back under the table. Well, that's from book 2. There's a book called In Motion, and it talks about how the wind is a powerful force. And then that whole idea keeps going through all 4 of those texts. So then the teacher keeps going and she says, like when the dust swirled around, it caused a lot of damage. And the children are all sharing things that they had, noticed in their first read of this Dust Bowl book. And the boy pops up again and he says, that is just like the towers of Nashwan. And then he turned around and he said, I can't believe I even know that. And then he went back under the table. And to me, it's like, when was the last time you were at a kiddie table where kids were practicing their phonics skills and that there was that kind of dynamic of instruction where he's talking about a scientific idea about the wind being a powerful force tied to these ancient 1,000-year-old towers in Iran that were built and then given a second usage as a windmill that protects a village from all of the power of the wind that could destroy the village. So to me, it was like that was such a culminating moment of knowing that those students had been working on specific phonic skills during that period of time and reviewing the whole way through. But the children weren't necessarily noticing that. They were excited about the knowledge.
Right.
That's so amazing. Yeah. And you also had me thinking too, like not even just that moment in that classroom, but when you brought up the Dust Bowl, my mind immediately went to the 6th grade module about the Great Depression and how, a lot of teachers, I think, might say, well, they won't understand out of the dust because they don't know anything about the Dust Bowl. But here you just perfectly described, we have our 2nd graders who are deep in this content, and what will that, those students, when they get to 6th grade, they will have so much to bring to that text. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a great point.
Yeah. So I have a question from, again, my middle school brain. So this might be obvious to all of you, but I completely am on board with the content, and it makes 100% sense to me. Like, why not build this content earlier for students? I have a question around I think these are 80% decodable for students, correct?
Well, they're 80% decodable as aligned to a specific scope and sequence. We have to be careful in the way that we say decodable. So, based upon what skills the students have at any given point, because something that's 80% decodable in maybe October of their 1st grade year could end up being 90 to 95% decodable at the end of 1st grade because they have so many more skills. But yes, when we really encourage teachers to line them up with what they have actually actively taught, to make sure that they're not just tossing the books in as decodable text, because they're not decodable unless they've had that.
That makes sense. So in the actual classroom,
yes,
I know that you guys don't have an exact, this is how to use GEODES, but I'm just wondering what this might look various ways, right? It might not be that, it might not line up exactly with where you are in Wit and Wisdom, because you're also taking where they are in Wilson Fundations into consideration. How does it actually play out in the classroom? How you use the GEODES?
I could start in on that. This is Emily again. I think we want them to be used flexibly in the sense of small group, full group, but I think to get to your question about, what should they line up with, we recommend that they line up with the phonics scope and sequence that increases the accessibility for students. And the key point of GEODES is also that they're applying their phonics skills that they've learned. So if they haven't learned, our controlled vowels yet, that those books come later on. So we wouldn't want, the teachers to necessarily skip ahead to those. We've thought about the sequence of knowledge build, and but we've also aligned them to the sequence of the phonics instruction as well. So I think we've seen them, like I alluded to before, with some teachers do some parts whole group, that maybe they'll do a vocab intro to the whole group, have save some time in small group, and then they pull groups for small group. And another thing that people might not realize with GEODES is the idea that we want students using the same text in the various groups. The idea that you differentiate the instruction, but you're not doing different types of text for different groups. I think we heard a speaker on Twitter, Tim Shanahan was just talking about that. And I think that really we felt that as well with the GEODES, that I think when I was at the kidney table myself, I would do different levels of text for different students, which means different levels for everybody, different text for everybody. And that meant one group, unfortunately, tended to be the A group, the B group, with those levels. They were reading the leaf is green, the leaf is red, the leaf is brown, versus level E, level F. They were reading whole different things. And we weren't building any type of shared knowledge. And, the equity there of knowledge building wasn't the same either. So I think in terms of GEODES, the idea that a teacher is doing the Dust Bowl with all our students, and he or she is, adapting that lesson for the needs of the students, but everybody is reading about the Dust Bowl in some way.
Yep. So, and would you mind giving us an example, and I will kind of prompt you for it. Like, for example, if I'm a teacher in the classroom and I'm using one of these texts, how would I make it accessible for all of my students?
Sure. Yeah, I think you look at having the data, knowing what your students' needs are, and knowing, what they need to work on. So I think you think about what's the entry point you can give to them. So I think you would, one, on the volume of text that they're reading. Some students may be able to read that whole book on their own. Some students may read 3 to 4 pages on their own, and the rest of the text they're doing a choral read or maybe echo read with the teacher. And some students really be focusing in on 1 to 2 pages of that, that the teacher has selected because it is has a lot, for the percentage of words that needs to be worked on, or they did the day before and they really got it down. So they want to do those 2 pages or 3 pages again to add on to what they've learned. So I think you're varying the amount of text that's read, and that will change over a course of a couple days, as you're reading that book. So I think that's the way students are reading the text itself, if it's completely independently or if it's a buddy read with a partner, I think you can vary that as well. So does that help give a better picture?
Yes, absolutely. I just think teachers really need to be able to conceptualize it. And the more that we can make it, really relevant for them and put it in words and terms that they can use when they grab the GEODES in their classroom, and remember Emily's words in our podcast, she said that it would be helpful to consider their entry point and think about what they know and how we can differentiate. Maybe it's a buddy read, because I think from talking with teachers, sometimes they feel like they're doing things wrong. And, that's, I think, a misconception if they're utilizing these texts in ways that are appropriate for their students in small groups and as the bridge between Wit and Wisdom core instruction and that systematic phonics approach. So, and Fundations, or another program. I know particularly we're aligned with Fundations, but I think that we need to empower teachers to do those things that they know are best, and we can give them the tools to support that. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Right, Lorraine, I want to add on. I know Lorraine and I have talked a lot. I think it was maybe an article by Sue Pimentel, and I think there was a second author that I can't remember right now, but he talked a lot about how sometimes teachers are giving away their diagnostic abilities when there's so many computerized tests, or screenings. And I totally agree. We agree that we trust teachers to make the right decisions for their students, and we honor their knowledge and skills to be able to do so. So I think we want to highlight that as well, that when you're sitting at the kidney table day after day with those students, you know them, and you're writing your observational notes down, you're knowing, seeing what errors are being made, and you're going to address those. So we want teachers to trust themselves, because we definitely trust their abilities to reach their students.
Yep. Agree. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm just really glad you guys brought that up, because I think even when you all did an introduction for GEODES here in Baltimore, I already heard a couple people kind of talking about using GEODES in a way that looks a little more like a guided reading, using level text, and even saying something like, well, we'll need the kindergarten ones because some of our students will be behind. So I'm really glad Emily brought up that idea of we're all trying to access the same text, and you differentiate how to get students there.
Well, one of the things I would add to that there may be situations, because I've worked with quite a few different schools now, and there are some schools that may feel like they instruct differently. This is what our issue is. If teachers, no matter what phonics curriculum they're using, If they're teaching all of their students that phonics concept, but then they put them into different texts, all the students are then not practicing that phonics concept. So we're actually working against ourselves by doing that. And there could be situations where, a student really needs more work with something else according to the foundational program, because we would always default to that as far as what a student needs. They're the experts in phonics, acquisition. But as a general rule, if the phonics program is being taught to the whole class, then the whole class, each member needs to practice the concept that's being taught, or they're just getting farther and farther and farther behind.
Can you off the top of your head, and if you can't, that is A-okay. I will find something to put in the notes of this podcast. But do you know the stat for how many times a child needs to interact with a word or that skill in order to put it in their long-term memory bucket?
I would say it varies. I think research has shown it can vary by vocabulary. I think it also kind of varies. A student that I think teachers kind of call it the light bulb went off, which I think if you read, for those teachers out there, if you haven't read David Kilpatrick, I'd highly recommend his work and the work of the reading lead to kind of get the background on that. But the idea of orthographic mapping is that students, when they're able to kind of absorb things so much faster. Say initially, if a student's working on the word cat and they have to find out cat, that's a lot of effort just to remember what the sound C, A, and T makes. But a student that has kind of, in a sense, memorized, or their brain has now sees cat and doesn't have to sound out each individual word, they can just see cat and read it as cat. Those students are then able, they have more room. If you think about their working memory, what's going on in their brain, they're then able to, if they could read the cat sat on the mat without sounding each one out, then they would probably be able to read, meow more easily than, say, a student that's still working on cat. So I think it varies a lot on, and the content knowledge varies, a little bit too. If students already know all about cats, then they're probably going to be able to read the word cat faster too. So I think there's a lot of variables there, and it would be great if we had one answer for that, but from what we've seen, it's very variable.
That's such a good point, and I'm so glad that you brought that up. And can you just share the article or the folks that you mentioned again? I know you said the Reading League and David, was it Fitzpatrick?
Kilpatrick.
Okay.
Yeah, we read some of his work, and it's helpful just to go through the stages and understand, what's happening in kids' brains, because that's hard to understand a lot of the time as a teacher, and knowing kind of the background of what's happening, I think, makes it easier to see it and plan and it's target that instruction.
Yes, and we'll link those in the show notes. But such a good point that it's so dependent on multiple factors. I mean, I think that's such a key point, because I think sometimes we want an answer, right? Like if a student encounters this word or concept 10 times, they'll put it in their long-term memory bucket. But that's not always the case. And most likely that's not the case because there's so many other factors, like you mentioned, like background knowledge and content knowledge, like all this stuff that contributes to that. So thank you for giving like a real honest answer and providing that research to support that.
Sure.
Awesome. Melissa, did you want to shift gears to another question?
Put me on the spot.
No, it's okay. Melissa always pulls through.
I do almost have one in my head. I didn't at the moment.
Melissa's like my incredible question asker friend. So I'm so glad that we do this together. So I guess we could ask Lorraine or Emily, do you have anything like that you want to share that we have not asked, or anything that you feel like would be really important for teachers or leaders listening to this podcast to know about geodes?
Good
that was very go ahead. We'll get specific.
So I would like to highlight some of the features of the books, maybe. That one of the things that, it's interesting because when you're doing these texts, You think, okay, we need a story and we need illustrations. But at some point in the process of creating the very first one, which was Library Cat, about the Library of Alexandria and cats keeping the scrolls there safe by eating the bugs, that in that first book, the book was pretty much like we had the idea of it. We had the idea of the illustrations. And then we had this sense, there's so much more to tell about this that you can't communicate with so few words. And we came up with the idea of having an adult read passage at the end of the Geode that is called The More. And in that passage, it goes into, most of the time, it goes into a relevant detail that maybe is mentioned in the text, but we simply didn't have the words to explain it. And it has been overwhelming to see student responses to that. We were in first grade classrooms, and when they realized that Emily, the hero on the call with us, had been in charge of writing and editing many of those. She has a team, but she had been primarily in charge of those getting finished. They clapped for her, and some of the kids wanted her to sign the books. We had students that were first graders that were reading the Moors because they loved the knowledge so much. And Emily, aren't they written on like a 5, 6 level, fifth grade, sixth grade level?
Yeah, we consider the readability. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the teachers were saying, we thought that these books were going to be mainly of interest to, struggling readers. They're phonetically correlated text. So of course, our high readers, they're not for them. But their higher readers were so fascinated by the accumulation of knowledge that they had a real appeal. And those beautiful more sections at the end are what really deepen the knowledge. So even though there are 64 first grade texts, there are actually 128 because the adult read aloud text is so powerful to add to the knowledge, aside from what we could put in captions. The captions are not necessarily decodable. Some of them are almost, but they're not intended to be read by the students. And that way we could pack in a little bit more knowledge. And then as a really beautiful aside, when schools get the black and white copies, which are take-home copies, there will be a Spanish translation of those more sections. So if the take-home copy goes to a home whose first language is Spanish, then the adult can still feel part of that knowledge building by reading aloud in Spanish. So we're really excited about those features of our text. And then also in Inside Geodes, which is the teacher resource that Emily leads the creation of, it also has what we like to say is everything we ever wanted at the kidney table, because it has all the words listed. Like, who doesn't want all the words and that are in the text? It has a summary of the text in case your group changes. Like, let's say that you're at a kidney table like me, that I would have, 5 or 6 groups in a day, sometimes 10 groups in a day, that you kind of forget, okay, what book am I using with this grade level? And you have a summary of the text. For the teacher, you have comprehension questions, both general and specific. And then probably my very favorite feature is the image discussion guide, because a lot of the knowledge that's embedded in those illustrations or photographs can be an invisible feature to a teacher that's accustomed to a student reading a text, glancing at the illustration, reading the text, glancing at the illustration, but to see the depth of knowledge that's in the illustration and the accuracy, that is also really interesting. Because even Library Cat, when we first did that book, you would think, okay, it's a library, it has a cat in it, the cat protects the book. oh my gosh, there was so much accuracy to deal with because were there really books? And when the research was done, there were no books. They were all scrolls. So we had to change the whole idea to scrolls. And then can we bring the word scroll in when we really want the students to learn the word book? So can we put the word scroll into the text? And then one of the things that we still laugh about is how long it took our illustrator and our accuracy specialist and the president of our organization to agree on the type of column that was featured on the cover of the text, because it had to be accurate with the historical times. So to this day, when we look at a column, we look to see if it matches the column that's in Library Cat. But that was, and to make that even more complicated, the artist that did that, Neil Brigham, he carves his work. So he had to go back and redraw and recarve. They were lino prints.
Oh my goodness.
Get that illustration exactly right. Yes. So that the image discussion guide is just such a great characteristic. I mean, such a great feature because it shows the depth to which research was done by our illustrators to make sure that what was put in there, we could stand behind and not have to reteach someday. So I think that's interesting. And then, like when you think about the topic, just such a wide range. But the beauty of it is that they're not just scattered, random topics of interesting things. They're always connected to each other in groups of 4. And then those 4 are connected in groups of 16. So, when you walk away from it, that students have accrued knowledge. And it isn't just, some random idea that we decided to throw into a book. So, and really world knowledge. Like in K2, kids visit over 33 countries. And they just experience so much from, I didn't know that Bangkok had floating market or that red kangaroos sat on their tails when they fought for balance, or that there's a mosque in Mali, West Africa that is budded once a year as a community celebration. Like all of these things that are really beautiful parts of culture all over the world, that our students are going to get to read about those and learn about different continents and countries and artists. It's we've just learned so much. We say that all the time, Emily. Our whole team, we'll say, we cannot believe how much we learned.
So you're building your own content knowledge.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
I think students and teachers love that. From those that we've talked to, the joy of learning and being able to share that knowledge with others. I mean, I think I know myself as a teacher, I love that moment in the classroom and to have that repeatedly. But even beyond that, it's the joy of students have when they read that themselves and they can say, I read about that windmill and I can tell you about it now. So I think it's that combination of being excited about learning something new that they can share, but also the fact that they read about it themselves just brings it to another level.
Yes. Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's amazing. There's so much I just feel there's so much joy and curiosity, and it just cultivates that their positive habits of mind to continue to want to learn more and seek more. And I know that you had mentioned, Lorraine, you had said there's 4 texts and then they're connected to a greater 16 texts. Could you just flesh that out a little bit more for those listening who don't know the scope and sequence? Would you mind being a little more specific?
Sure. I'll just go back to the wind one that I talked about before when I talked about the boy with the towers of Nashtafan. So that module is actually called Powerful Forces in Wit and Wisdom. So we haven't really talked so much these books being a bridge between foundational skills, specifically the Fundations Tier 1 phonics spelling program over into the Wit and Wisdom topic. So these are like a bridge between the two. So in the Powerful Wisdom module, students are reading books that orient around the wind, like Brave Irene, What are the other ones?
There was the owl.
Like, what is the wind?
The owl story. I can't remember. It's all right. Oh yeah, owl.
Yeah, Owl at Home, where the
Yes.
wind is personified, as a guest. And there are so many great stories that feature the wind or the actual knowledge of the wind. So what we did was we looked at, okay, we need 16 books on the wind. And when we started, this is really interesting. When we started with the first draft of titles, it's the only one I remember that when we went into senior team discussion about whether we were going the right direction, the response was, these 16 are really kind of repetitive and boring. We're going to have to go back and rethink them. And when the concept development team got back together, they found the most fascinating things. And one of the things we haven't really talked about is also the genre spread.
Yes.
Where we have literary informational text and literary nonfiction. But even within our literary text, we have poetry and prose, so that it's not that students pick it up and it feels like they're reading a formula. So when you look at the first set of 4 books, it's all about wind and earth, and it introduces the wind as a powerful force. But we have, a book about the way the wind scatters seed. We have a book about, a very basic book on the wind and how wind causes things to go into motion, that wind is emotion. We have Crafted by the Wind, which is actually an informational text about yardangs. You may not have even known what yardangs are.
I don't.
You might want to look this up.
I don't either.
and then it has a folk tale called A Growing Wind that talks about how a tree grows in the wind, and that trees grow stronger when the wind, when they're in the path of the wind. And then we go into another set, which is Blown Away, which is like the Wright brothers, a Viking story, kites that are used in different parts of the world for an actual celebratory purpose. And then we have Catching the Wind, which that's where the Towers of Nashtafan were in there. We have an illustration. A literary piece about a fire that happens at a mill in the Netherlands. We have of the of Mondrian, not a story. We have an informational text about Mondrian, who actually painted windmills, but we look at another piece of his work. And then we go into The Mighty Wind, which talks about how we even have a wind scale, and it teaches about the wind scale. This is interesting. That one, I have a 15-year-old daughter, and when she read that one for the first time, she left the room for a minute, went outside, and then came back in. And I said, "What were you doing? Feeding the dogs?" And she said, "No, I was just out there measuring the wind." Because it has this how-to measuring the wind part of it. And then the Dust Bowl, story of a hurricane in Galveston, Texas. So it really keeps the students. It's not like they read about the wind and then the wind and then the wind. It really takes them into different facets. So one of the things about building knowledge that's so interesting is you can say, well, should first graders spend that much time just learning about the wind? But when you discover the depth of knowledge about any one topic, you realize there is that depth of knowledge about everything. So by trying to have like this idea that students just need to learn to read and then they can just Google what they want to know. If they've never learned the depth of what they can know about something, they also aren't necessarily going to dig into the depths of something they're even interested in. Natalie Wexler's been writing a lot about this. She just had an article that surfaced this week in The Atlantic. And she really talks about this whole issue. Like when we stick with discrete skills, instead of actually teaching history and science and content that build about the knowledge about the world, we're really making matters worse, because children aren't learning that they can have all of this connected knowledge in their mind. It's not just random knowledge. It's connected and deep knowledge that builds a desire to learn more. My dream would have been for kids to come to my kidney table excited about what we were going to read next, instead of just me trying to get them excited about, a new application of a phonics skill.
We're actually really glad that you mentioned that by Natalie Wexler, mentioned Natalie Wexler. We podcasted with her, and hers will be coming out on the day that her book comes out on August 6th. Because we feel like she's also a disruptor in how we're moving forward, thinking about all of the things that you just mentioned. She is bringing it to light in, national publications in a way that we're hopeful that people will hear and listen to and bring attention to. So thanks for calling her out. I've added her also in the link, and I'm Googling her most recent article.
Oh, it's a good one. It reminds me too, I think it might have been in one of Natalie's articles at some point, but she talks about like the Velcro theory, right? That like all these little, all this knowledge is like little Velcro balls that continue to stick for our students. So that's what it reminds me of when you talk about all these different parts of the wind, that they're all these little balls that they're collecting, and they have something for it to stick to, versus those books where there's nothing for it to stick to. Like you're just continuing to let them stick together and building it, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it, Melissa. And when I think about, teachers in the classroom, I know everybody's always worried about time. There's not enough time to do. When you think about when that knowledge is sticking, when there's connections between the knowledge, when students are in your small group, you don't have to explain how the wind works to explain the Galveston hurricane, because they have some background knowledge of that already, or their content knowledge has been built. So I think when you read books around similar topics, you don't have to start from scratch each time. It's students that, foundation is built up a little bit, more each time. So I think that makes a difference too.
Yep. And it makes a difference in their confidence and motivation, like you guys have mentioned too.
Yes. So I guess my question is, how can we access GEODES if we are a school that is implementing Wit and Wisdom? How do we get GEODES? Do we reach out? Who do we reach out to? Who do we let know that we want this to happen in our building, in our school, for our kids?
What I would suggest is just go to the Great Minds website. You can put that in your note. Go to the website, because there's a way that you can put in your basic information and say that you're interested, and also get access to looking at Library Cat and Illustrator at Work, 2 books that are online digitally, so you can actually see for yourself.
Great. And I believe there's also a link to the webinar, the recorded webinar for GEODES. Yep.
Right. Yeah, that's great
too. On GEODES, we can go to greatminds.org, look at some sample GEODES, jump in on a pre-recorded webinar, get more information. And then I would love for you each to leave us with your best advice for implementing GEODES. So pretend you're talking to a Baltimore teacher. He or she just received their GEODES shipment, their
boxes and boxes.
Yes. They're so pumped up. They're holding these beautiful books that feel special in their hands. What is your best advice for that teacher if you were standing there talking to them?
I can start there. I would say, it's going to be a shift in your thinking in using the same text for all students, but ultimately I think it'll be more efficient and save time in terms of your planning, rather than, I know I had my teacher bag with my 10 different books that I would lug back and forth every day. On the weekend, I'd add more to it, and my shoulder. No wonder my shoulder still hurts. But anyways, like that, I'm lugging. You have a book or a couple books that maybe you're working on the week, but you can focus your energy and planning time on addressing, the needs of the students in those groups. It's not about what's this book about, how am I going to teach the knowledge of this book. You're building that knowledge continuously, and you don't have to necessarily, as a teacher, teach yourself, what that book is about. So I think, although it's different than using a level A, a level C, a level E book for various students, having one book and finding the different entry points, like we said, for each of those groups, I think ultimately, will help instruction and your planning time. I think we've heard from the field that teachers say, it's more efficient. it's a lot. It's the bridge. It's all coming together now. They're learning this in Fundations. They've learned about the wind in Wit and Wisdom, and now at my small group, we're just building on that. So we've heard really positive things from the field and from students. So I think we really, want you to give it a try, and what we've seen happening in classrooms is working.
Great. We agree. Please try. Lorraine, any thoughts for that teacher from you? Thank you, Emily.
Sure.
I think one of the things that I would want to say is be sure that two things. One thing is sit down and read all 16 books and just enjoy them. And read the teaser and then the book and then the more section and think about what you learned. And just enjoy them for the knowledge and for the entertainment value and like just the joy of reading. That's the first thing I would do. And then when I sat down with a group of students, really think to yourself, there's a beautiful, I can't remember the name of it, Emily, that illustration that shows like the varied ways that you can have students read a text. Like the highest level of support is reading it out loud, then it's echo reading, then partner reading, then independent reading, and really thoughtfully consider what does this group of students need? What's the least level of support they need? Because sometimes these books are so interesting that teachers use their complex text strategy and they go right in reading the book out loud to the children every single time, even when it's an opportunity for the students to read those texts on their own. And I mean, there are going to be students that need it read aloud. We're not saying that all the students should dive in and just, stumble through the text if that's where they are. But really think about your group and, can they, when you're doing a core ELA program like Wit and Wisdom, you're doing a lot of read aloud. And you can get into that idea in your mind that you always need to read it out loud to the students. But I would just suggest allowing students to practice their skills. And that's how they, employ the idea that phonics is worth learning. And in this particular situation, because it is so correlated to what they've learned, it's also worth using. It's a good strategy for reading. Rather than
that's a great point, Lorraine. I think the idea, students need to be reading at the kidney table, figure out as much time as possible, let less of the teacher talk so students can be reading. Because the idea, if not now, when? If they're not reading in the classroom with you, we don't know all the time at home if they're able to read, as much or time-wise. There's so much stuff going on. But we know when they're with you in the classroom, that's the time they have to practice the reading, and you can, as a teacher, be there to support it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm going to steal that line, Lorraine. What's the least amount of support they need to access this text on their own? I'm stealing it. It's perfect.
I already put it. I think that actually goes the whole way up, though. It really, sometimes we just take for granted that the students can't handle it. Even like when you think about a 6th grade classroom, when you're already into a novel, if the students are curious enough about the book, they will make themselves read beyond what maybe they even thought. I mean, just think about the whole Harry Potter phenomenon that happened when I was teaching 4th grade. And I had these students that were going to the library and getting these tiny books. Harry Potter came out and all of a sudden they're carrying around these great big books and flying through them. Like, how did that happen?
Because it was so interesting and engaging. I even stayed up till 3 a.m. to finish Harry Potter. As the teacher of those two. Yeah, I mean, I just think you're so right that when they want to learn because they're engaged, and that's what GEODES do, with this perfect merge of, I don't want to say it's perfection, but I think it's darn near close. This perfect merge of the word study skills that they're learning, and then the bridging of the content knowledge. It's just incredible. So thank you for taking the time to be here. Thank you for giving us your best advice. We plan to quote you both heavily in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we are so excited for the implementation of the GEODES in Baltimore this year. We're just I'm sure we'll talk to all of you a lot this year about it.
Well, we're excited to see it in action.
Yeah, we look forward to
wait.
it. And thanks, Melissa and Lori, for having this platform where we can talk and share ideas. And thanks to all your listeners out there. I know as a podcast lover myself, I'm often folding the laundry while doing so or something. So,
Yes.
Shout out to all of you listeners who are folding your laundry, going for a walk, or picking up your kids from soccer practice.
Yeah.
Keep doing what you're doing. Yeah.
Or going for a run, or shopping in Trader Joe's. All the things I also like to do while podcasting, Emily.
Yeah.
To that end, we do want to take a minute and ask anyone who's listening out there to please leave us a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening on, because it does some insane things with the algorithm, and it means that our podcast will pop up to the front of the suggested podcast. So if you're listening, please, please, please give us a 5-star review. If you don't want to give us a 5-star review, then maybe don't give a review at all, because we want to make sure that we head right to the top. So we will take your feedback, but like we will take it directly via Twitter or or another platform that doesn't impact our algorithm. Thank you both for being on.
Yeah, thank you so much.
We're so grateful.
Yep. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was very enjoyable.